ga ik zo naar ChatGPT. Oké, chatgpt.com. What can I help with? Hi.
Hi there, how's it going?
So, I'm making a documentary, and I wondered if you could do the voiceover for it?
Sure, I have a great voice for documentaries.
Okay. And could you also create some videos for the intro?
Sure, what's it about?
It's about digitalization.
Okay, sounds boring.
Actually, it's not. We interviewed the fascinating researcher Tamar Sharon. And since we spoke, I wonder why we don't speak about digitalization every day.
All right then, let's see. Here we go. Are we still living in the real world, or is the digital one becoming omnipresent in our lives? Few philosophers truly shake the world. Tamar Sharon is one of them. As a professor at Radboud University and co-director of iHub, she leads groundbreaking research on steering digitalization in the right direction. In a world racing ahead with technology, her critical perspective is more vital than ever. Beyond academia, Tamar Sharon advises the European Commission as part of the European Group on Ethics, helping shape EU legislation and policies. The European Union stands as the world's only real counterforce against the unchecked power of big tech, striving to set ethical boundaries before it's too late.
If you would compare this time to the 90s.
In terms of digitalization,
Yeah.
there's a lot more of it.
It was all analog,
It
almost.
was mostly analog, so the smartphones came out around 2007. I think that was a big turning point.
Digitalization is permeating every aspect of our lives, in everything we do. From how we communicate with friends to how we shop, work, and even engage in politics.
Digitalization brings with it many promises, many benefits. It's promising to make things more efficient, to reduce workloads, to address personnel shortages. But we know it also brings with it all kinds of risks. And so the more data we collect on people, the greater risks of privacy breaches we have, right? Algorithms, like humans, have biases, and they're reproducing stereotypes and leading to discriminatory outcomes. We know this, for example, from the toeslagen affair in the Netherlands. We have a tsunami of misinformation that's being channeled through social media, which is presenting new threats to our democracies. So the work that I and my colleagues do is really to try to identify these unintended impacts of digitalization on society. Let's take a look at what's happening before it's too late, before we lose things that as a society we cherish.
Could you give an example of how that works in shops?
Yeah, so shops and supermarkets are a really interesting area. And what you see there is that in the past years, there's been this push to automate checkout counters. And the idea there is to make things more efficient. And I think we've all had the experience that these things don't always work well, or you don't always understand yourself how they're supposed to work.
Artikel geannuleerd. Wacht op hulp.
Hi. Sorry, ik weet niet wat is aan de hand, maar ik wilde alles verwijderen.
Alles?
Yeah. And so they've created this new function, I don't know what it's called, but the kind of human that patrols all the automated checkout machines. But it's also, again, a very, I think, boring job.
Yes, hij is helemaal goed. Dankjewel hè, fijne dag.
These poor human patrollers of the machines have also become police now. They have to check that you're not stealing or that you have the right age to be buying alcohol, etc.
Wacht op hulp.
When these practices get automated, we lose something that we hadn't really realized was part of the practice. And in this case, you get a supermarket that realized, well, actually, there were people who came to the supermarket for whom the interaction with the human behind the checkout counter was an important part of their day. And so let's bring this back. And now we have the kletskassa, right?
Ja, dat komt helemaal goed.
And this is a recurrent thing we see in automation, in automating practices, is that there's elements of the practice that are kind of foregrounded and automated, where there were other components of the practice that were very meaningful and valuable that get automated away.
Not only shops are using technology, digitalization is everywhere. But perhaps nowhere has it made a bigger impact than in the classroom.
Wait. You know, it sounds good, but I'm not sure if that's even true. Nowhere has it made a bigger impact. Could you maybe ask, what are we losing in the classroom?
Is there something we might be losing in the classroom?
Yes, something like that. Thanks for making these videos, by the way. It saves me a lot of time.
No problem. Hopefully you can't even tell what's real and what's AI generated.
And also, like, ChatGPT in education has brought a whole new range of problems for teachers, I guess.
Yes, I think students in schools, almost all of them are using ChatGPT to help them with their homework or with exams. While the whole point of homework is to help us think. When we write, we're thinking, we're developing arguments, we're structuring arguments. There is a very complex cognitive thing going on when we write. And if we're only focusing on the output, then we're not practicing that. iHub is a research center. It's an interdisciplinary research center on digitalization and society. So our aim is to identify the effects of digitalization on society in order to help steer digitalization processes in ways that would protect, or in ways in which public values would be central. No one discipline has all the theoretical and methodological tools to do this on its own, and so we're bringing together researchers from many disciplines. We have computer scientists and interactive designers. We have philosophers and ethicists like myself. We have legal researchers. We have social scientists, including linguists, communication scientists, and behavioral psychologists. Right. And they're all working together.
Function of creativity?
The value of creativity. Speak about next steps in the article, or do we all say it's on pause for a week or so? They organized this really nicely. They brought 5 students from middelbare school. Yeah. We each had this kind of stelling. And mine was leave the kids alone, stop with all the digital monitoring. And so I spoke about panopticons and Foucault and privacy and the breathing space and did my thing, and there was nodding in the audience, and then the chair kind of asked the kids, so, you know, Tijn, how do you feel about your personal freedom being narrowed down by digital monitoring? Oof. Couldn't care less. I don't feel like my liberty is being constrained. The girls either. No, my parents are really okay when it comes to magister. They don't check all the time. And so I said, well, what's interesting about Foucault is this idea that the gaze is internalized, and we start behaving as if we're being watched, even if nobody's watching, and that's what we see here. And I think it's up to the adults in the room to stop watching rather than for these kids to say, stop watching me.
So what will be your next step?
Well, one sphere that I would like to look more into is agriculture. It's one that we don't think that much about when we think in terms of digitalization, but there's so much happening on what we're calling smart farms. Because of the amount of data that is being generated in these sectors and the need to manage that data, the farmer, like the doctor, like the teacher, is becoming more and more a data manager. My own research looks at the impacts of digitalization through the lens of sphere transgressions. This is a term I borrow from the philosopher Michael Walzer. And by sphere transgressions, I mean that the introduction of digital technologies into new spheres or sectors like healthcare, like education, like agriculture, brings with it a certain way of thinking It's a way of seeing the world as something that can be quantified, measured, and controlled.
Transgressions are happening all the time, so much so that it's hard to keep up. What does big tech's intrusion into our other domains mean for us? And what values is Silicon Valley imposing along the way? What does it mean, for example, for a home care worker?
The value of efficiency is one of the main ones that digitalization brings with it in all spheres that undergo digitalization. But efficiency can clash with one of the core foundational values of healthcare, empathy, right? Empathy is something that, by definition, inherently is time-consuming. It's not something that you can render more efficient.
Home nurses help people with dressing, bathing, and administering medication, tasks that in theory could be done by a robot.
But the home nurse, while they're doing these things, is also doing all kinds of other things. They're looking into the kitchen to see if there's fresh food around. They're using their sense of smell to get a sense if the place is clean. They're chatting with the client or with the patient while they're dressing them, while they're helping them bathe and so forth. These are all aspects of the care practice which risk getting automated away if we only see this in terms of efficiency. There is something possibly inherently inefficient about providing care, which we might lose if we're only focusing on efficiency.
Hi.
Yeah.
In healthcare, GPs in particular are under pressure to work efficiently. They have only a few minutes per patient to write a report. That's why an AI assistant now helps by summarizing conversations and filling in forms. But what happens to the data? Can we really trust that a Silicon Valley company has no other interests in mind? You know, nobody really stops to think about the influence Silicon Valley has on their lives. While I am doing the voiceover, you could be doing something else. And yet you're using ChatGPT, a product by OpenAI. How are companies like that shaping the way we work?
We've become quite aware of how tech billionaires are starting to influence politics through control over means of communication. That is what I would call a sphere transgression into the sphere of politics. But what we've been looking at in our research is also how big tech is transgressing into other public sectors and spheres of society. So this is the website we built that we call it Sphere Transgression Watch. And what we've tried to do here is really to visualize, to make visual how present these big tech companies have become in different spheres of society: education, science and analytics, outer space, politics. And now if we want to see what Apple is doing, and we can go to education, and we can see something like Apple Learning Coach. And you can go from here to other spheres as well. So what is now Amazon doing in the political sphere? Here we go. I get, when I show this to people, that they're like, wow, I didn't know these companies were so busy in all of these different areas of society. So it's very helpful in raising awareness amongst the general public, but also amongst policymakers. And so as these actors move into these spheres, these tech billionaires who are not accountable like public sector actors are, over whom we have no oversight, we also start becoming increasingly dependent on these actors in these spheres for the provision of very basic public goods. My university, as all universities in the Netherlands now, is working with Microsoft. All of the computational infrastructure that we use, it's all now Microsoft 365.
It's quite funny that you're studying how big tech is moving into everything, and
I do it also through big tech, yeah.
You can't escape it.
No, No, which shows how far along we are.
So digitalization might seem like a way to become more efficient. You might think it gives you more time for things you enjoy, like cooking. But is it truly a solution, or is it just creating new problems?
Interesting. Hey, and what would you suggest as an ending?
Well, Tamar might suggest that you think twice before asking an AI. Maybe you're hoping for a better documentary, but what you're losing is control over your own creativity.
What should be done?
What do we need to do? That is, of course, a very big question because it's a really big challenge. So I think we need to address this on various levels. A very important one is regulation. And the European Commission is really at the forefront internationally of trying to regulate digital harms. This is great. This is very important. It remains to be seen how far the European Union will be able to impose regulation on the rest of the world now that Donald Trump is in the White House. We also need to use public alternatives to big tech where they exist and invest in them where they don't exist. Alternatives which are organized or designed around public values, not profit. This is one of the things we do at iHub as well, trying to develop these technical prototypes that aren't produced in order just to make profit. Another really important one, and maybe the most important one, is to say we need to push back against techno-solutionism as a general mindset in our society. We run so quickly towards digital technologies as solutions to societal problems without asking first, what exactly is the problem that we want to solve with a technology, and can a technology solve that problem? The problem with techno-solutionism is very much that, when we run to these solutions to solve problems which are not technological problems, we're leaving the real problems untouched.